Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here's your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday morning. Thanks for taking some of that Sunday morning out to spend it with us here at Faith in Our Hometown. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about things you hear about in the media all the time. And even that you're hearing them in the media is interesting, but that the term is fake news. So what is fake news, and what does that even mean? I'd like to talk about that a little bit. Of course, I have a communication background, and I've got somebody who's got a long communication background with him this morning. And that's going to be Randy Turner, who's the founder and the editor of the Turner Report and a former local newspaper editor from lots of different places around the region. So we're going to be back to talk to Randy in a few minutes about the role of the press, why they're, in my opinion at least, very important, and about this concept of what we talk about in terms of fake news. So just join us, get your cup of coffee, do what you need to do, but in just a minute we're going to have the Mercy Minute, and then right after that we're going to continue on with our conversation. So stick with us, and it's good to have you.
You don't realize how much weight you put on until it's gone. I'm Katie Dahl. I work in the emergency room at Mercy Joplin. I'm a nurse. I've been there for 8 years. I love my job. I think I have the best job in the world because I get to take care of people every single day. I had gastric bypass surgery almost a year ago. I have lost a total of 130 pounds. 30 pounds I lost before surgery with diet and exercise. It's not been easy. The surgery definitely has helped it come off easier, but I still have to, watch what I eat, still have to exercise. I have a lot more energy. I can move around. My body doesn't ache anymore like it used to. I was pre-diabetic, and now my blood sugars are all good, and I'm not worried about being pre-diabetic anymore. I feel like I was when I was younger in high school and in my teenage years, just getting back to where I feel comfortable in my own skin now.
Well, good morning again, and thanks for joining us for another week at Faith in Our Hometown. My guest this morning, Randy Turner. Randy is a former local newspaper editor and editor of the Turner Report, and also an author. There you have it. So, at any rate, Randy, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you came to talk about this topic with me this morning.
Well, I'm one of the lucky people in that I started my newspaper career when I was 21 at the Newton County News to work my way to become a teacher when I was attending Missouri Southern, and I ended up spending 22 years in newspapers because I couldn't get a teaching job. Then I taught for 14 years, and for the last 6 I've been full-time with the Turner Report, which I started about 16 years ago. But I consider myself lucky in that I have never had a day in my life that I went to a job that I didn't love doing.
Good.
And one of the things that I have loved doing the most about this is to tell people things they don't know, to publicize good things. Sadly, you have to publicize a lot of bad things.
Sure.
And I've been able to, for the past 14 years, to write about, on average, a book a year. Some on the Joplin tornado, some on education. And the book that I am working on, which tentatively will be out later this year, is called, again tentative, The Buck Starts Here, and it will be a biography, as far as I can determine, the first of President Truman and his birthplace of Lamar.
There you go. Yeah, I used to be the pastor up in Lamar. I love that little town. It's a great spot. Now, you used to be the newspaper editor up there, right?
Right.
And some of the others, you did several.
Well, I had 2 stints at the Newton County News. People get rid of me and then they bring me back.
Well, there you go.
And
I guess that's good.
And after that, I had worked at the Lamar Democrat in 1978 as a sports editor. But they were in the midst of selling to a chain, and they ended up cutting about 2/3 of the people. So in 1979, they had cut me, but they brought me back to be the editor of a weekly called the Lockwood Luminary Golden City Herald, and unfortunately that weekly went out of business about 10 months later. Oh. So I returned to finish my college degree and worked again at the Newton County News while I was doing that. Then I returned to the Lamar Democrat for 8 years as the managing editor. Went to the Carthage Press. I was a general assignment reporter there for 3 years, and then I was the managing editor there for 6 years, and then I went into teaching for 14 at Diamond and Joplin.
So you have been around the region, probably even more than I have, which is saying a lot. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this concept. Sometimes I think that today, because of our culture and because of certain people have decided to demonize the press, that people think that the press is nosy and just puts their business in their nose in people's business when they shouldn't, and all those kinds of things. What's the role of the press, and why do we need the press, Randy?
Well, the press's job is to find out things that the people need to know. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that people need to know and the things they don't like the most are about people that they voted for.
Okay.
They're about people who represent them, people they like a lot of times. But, it's also, it's kind of a trade-off, because you also, and people never seem to mention this, how many times that the press are the ones who spread the good news about things that are happening. I mean, consider the Joplin tornado. After that happened, you had the people at the Globe, you had the people at KZRG who gave people information they absolutely had to know, and for the most part couldn't find out anywhere else. I tried to do my part on that, but it paled in comparison to what they were doing.
Sure.
But you don't hear about that these days, because we've reached the point where if you don't agree with someone politically, you're fake news and you're bad news when,
And see, and I don't really know what that means. I mean, if you're really just trying to put the truth out there. Now, granted, when I went to school, we were told we were supposed to stay out of the story. And once in a while, I think that, I do think that current practice sometimes in the media is that people do get involved and too personally invested in the story themselves, and so that would be one of my critiques of sometimes the modern way of reporting. But back, boy, when I studied, and if we put ourselves in the middle of a story, boy, we'd have just they'd have flagged that paper in a heartbeat and said that it's just not the way we're supposed to do it. We're supposed to report the truth as we see it, and then back that up with our facts,
right?
And then let people make their own decisions. But your job is to present the truth.
And the thing we get now, and I'll tell you some of the criticism that I get around here is because a lot of the things that I write are critical of Republican office holders from this area, and I'm trying to find a Democratic office holder in this area to be critical of, but they're just not around.
That many of them, right?
So it's the way it ends up. Now, people don't have a long enough memory to remember that when I was in newspapers in the 90s, the Speaker of the House in Missouri was a Democrat named Bob Griffin, who was crooked, corrupt, and I ripped into him with some good, solid information. But that's been so long ago that now people, if they see you write one thing that doesn't go along with what they say, automatically you're if you're from one side, you're a liberal and a leftist. And if you're from the other side, you're a right-winger or conservative or whatever. And it's just bad.
It's interesting to me because, you said something earlier on that I keep saying to, my boss, the bishop, and of course, I work in the media. I've got a TV show. All that kind of good stuff. But the deal is that I need people to get my message out there. If we're doing something, I want my story out there. Now, by the very same token, I can't have it both ways. If I'm out there and I then do something wrong, well, of course that's going to hit the paper. Of course that's going to hit the news. If I'm not walking my walk, or or talking out of both sides of my mouth, or however you want to say it, if I'm not doing that, well, I ought to be prepared for a little bit of a pushback, because for a living, to some degree, I make suggestions perhaps about the way people ought to live, or the way people ought to treat each other. And if I'm not doing the same thing, I'm opening myself up to get dinged.
And that's one of the things when I was the editor over at Carthage, and For a time there, I had a lot of young reporters working for me, and I told them that if there ever comes a time when I do something that puts me in the news in a negative light, I said, you put that on page 1, or if it's a list of people who violated the law, even if it's parking tickets, you put my name at the top of the list so people know I'm not trying to hide it, because you have to be fair in those situations. And that's the way I think a part of the problem with the media is a lot of times we're a little reluctant to admit when we're wrong about something. Mm-hmm. I make mistakes, and when I do, I come right out and admit them. Of course, there are some people who think that opinions are mistakes because they don't agree with theirs, but I'm talking strictly about facts. If I get something wrong, I am not going to just change it on the blog and hope that people didn't notice it. I change it, I put on there, I've changed this is what it originally said, or if someone makes a comment and has that on there, I will respond to that and say it has been changed so people can see what it originally said. Mm-hmm. And I think if the media does that, and a lot of the media does, then I think people will trust them more, but it still comes down to these days, people get to pick and choose what they want in the news, and they're not looking for any source that doesn't totally agree with them.
Yeah, and I remember growing up, I remember being in school, and we kept looking at each other going, you really should pretty much get the same news. Mm-hmm. And we did, 50 years ago, mm-hmm. we did pretty much get the same news watching all the network channels. Mm-hmm. Now, somebody might have a story faster than somebody else or whatever, but really, you pretty much got the same news. Somebody mm-hmm. might scoop somebody else on something, but then the next day they'd still pretty much have all the same facts. Whereas today, to me, it's very interesting that you can pick and choose depending on the mm-hmm. flavor of the news that you want, and you're going to see two completely different representations.
Absolutely.
And that's where I think that we've kind of gotten a little bit away from strict news reporting mm-hmm. to kind of more editorializing and posing as news. And in that regard, I think I will join some of the criticism of some of the media in that regard, because I don't think it's non-biased anymore. I think that mm-hmm. in some ways, I think some people try, a lot of places try, but some places I'm not so sure try very hard not to be biased.
Well, when you're talking especially about cable news, for instance, you're talking about they have found a niche that gets them a bigger audience, gets them more money, and you have left-leaning networks that totally go in that direction. You have right-leaning networks. They found what they can make money off of. That's what they do. I think the news operations are still rock solid, but a lot of times the people who are the faces of those news operations, or not the news operations, the faces of the networks are opinion people, and they end up having a lot more of an impact sometimes than the news operation does.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. My guest this morning, Randy Turner, who's the founder and editor of the Turner Report here in our area, and a former local newspaper editor. We're talking a little bit about, the media and what is the role of truth in the media and all those things. We're going to be right back after a quick break, so don't go away.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
So again, my guest this morning, Randy Turner, local former newspaper man, teacher, author. We're talking a little bit about the role of the press and the importance of really the investigative press and a fair press in a local community. I remember growing up in St. Louis, okay, mm-hmm. and at that point in time, we had two excellent dailies. We had the Post-Dispatch and we had the Globe Democrat. Now, I think the funny part is the Globe Democrat was very Republican in terms of their editorials and everything else, and the Post-Dispatch was more Democratic. which I thought was really kind of funny because why did they have the names seem to be all mixed up or whatever. But you could count on those editorial pages for them to take a little bit of a slant that would favor either more conservative or more liberal or however you wanted to phrase all that. But you had it. But you had two of them, and only on the editorial pages though did they say this is an editorial and this is our opinion. But when you read page 1 of that newspaper, you were supposed to be reading facts, backed up by investigative reporting and those kinds of things. And so they either had the facts straight or that wouldn't have been on the news page. If it was just simply an editorial, it would have been on the editorial page. But I think we blurred some of those lines now, and especially, as you said, in cable news, those lines, they really seem to be blurred there.
Yes.
So why is it important for us to have the newspaper anyway? Why wouldn't we just ignore it and skip it? Why would we want somebody checking on our politicians? Why would we want somebody checking on our churches? Why would we want somebody checking on all that? And what's usually peddled out in the society?
Because these things really affect everyone. They're handling how your tax money is spent. If you're on a school board, you're handling how decisions are made that will affect your children. You're also talking about one of the reasons, for instance, that public education was started, that people seem to forget, is so that the people are informed and able to take part in their own government. And we seem to have forgotten that with all the testing emphasis and all that, but I'm getting into a whole different subject there, so I will not wander off here.
Okay, all right.
But the main thing about this is that when the people have to be informed to be able to be good citizens, and there has still not been found a way, to my way of seeing it, that's better than newspapers. And I still will go with newspapers over any other form, even though, what they're putting online now fits the same bill a lot of times.
Yeah,
but,
in terms of print online.
Right, because you have lengthier stories.
Right,
you're not
more
getting
in depth.
Little sound bites. If people take the time to read, and unfortunately in this day and age, a lot of people don't have the time to or the inclination, then the information is there for them. Now, admittedly, we probably need to be educating people on what to be looking for, how to tell if a news site is opinion, how to tell if it's fact.
Right.
And it's getting more and more difficult, especially when you have a bunch of people who are trying to make sure that you have things that are put on the internet that look like news websites and aren't, and are actually giving fake news that people are creating to sway elections. And I still think, for the most part, the old, solid, established news organizations, and especially newspapers, which sadly have fallen on hard times these days, it's still the best way to go for people to be informed.
Yeah, well, that certainly goes back to my training as well, and I just always said, well, there's nothing wrong with the radio news, there's nothing wrong with the TV news, but it can't be as in depth as most of the time you can put in print. I just know every time we try to contend, for example, with a big moral issue or something, and a TV reporter wants to come and interview me. Well, I know I can't explain that in in less than 10 minutes. But yet I'm supposed to somehow spit something out in 30 seconds that's supposed to encapsulate the whole argument. And sometimes it just can't be done.
And we've also reached a point where cities and schools and other organizations now have somebody who's specifically hired to handle public relations. And all the years I was working in newspapers, you could go right to the person who was in charge of it and you could find out. And now you have to go through all kinds of layers. You have to get things transmitted from one person to another, and you're never really sure of what's coming out. And you can't ask anything, you can't ask follow-up questions when it's done that way. And I think the public's losing a lot on that. That's why it's so important to have people who can go through records, who can do interviews with people who aren't necessarily the people who are in charge. Lunell Clark, who was the editor who hired me at the Lamar Democrat, once told me, she said, don't worry about the mayors and the city managers. Get to know the secretaries and get to know the people who clean up the building after night, and you'll be able to know what's going on.
At least you get a different viewpoint of it.
And she also told me to hang around the donut shop and listen to what's going on, but I never did quite get into that.
Never developed an
She
affection
did it well,
for donuts. Yeah, they're for donuts. It's interesting. When it comes to figuring out how to digest some of these things, I can't, again, sometimes have to, try to convince, my own bishop that it's good to talk to the media. That he's got to have relationships with folks in order to do that. He says, every time everyone wants to come and wants to complain or wants to talk about something, I'm just like, yeah, I know, but if you don't have a relationship built up to where there's some trust and they figure out, the Jewish will have the conversation with them, then it looks like we're always playing defense. It looks like we're always trying to hide everything. If you talk to them all the time about the things you want out, yes, there's going to be a time when you're going to have to talk to them about stuff that you'd really rather not talk about. Like for in our instance, yes, the church does a lot of good and all those good things, but yes, did we have a mess, and do we still have a mess cleaning up, some of these issues that are still hanging on from the abuse crisis? And again, it's not that abuse it's always taken place in the church. It's always taken place in families. It's always taken place, period. But now we've kind of ripped the top off of everything, and of course nobody wanted to talk about it. Mm-hmm. But if the media had not in some ways forced us to talk about it, we wouldn't be where we are in terms of trying to respond and doing so in what I think is a much more effective and more honest and transparent way than we used to try to deal with it, which was maybe if we just won't talk about it, nobody will know that it was happening. Mm-hmm. Well, now we had to, because people are shining a light in all the corners, and we've got to respond. And so we had to. And as far as I'm concerned, if it weren't for the media holding our feet to the fire and saying, you have to respond to this because now we've got this, we wouldn't be as far along on this process of trying to help in terms of the broader recovery, and I mean that in the broadest sense of the word. Not much, and I'm not saying that's not also true for individuals, but I'm just saying in terms of the recovery for the whole system, we wouldn't be there if nobody had forced us to look at the truth.
And that's really, you summed it up just right there, because the media plays an important role. And a lot of times people just look at it, they're out to, it used to be to sell papers, they'd say. And sure, they love selling papers, but they still say that, and they don't have news racks where you can see the front page of papers anymore. They have to develop a trust and get people to buy the newspaper because they know that there's going to be something in there that's worth reading and something that will improve their knowledge of their communities.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. We've got about 3 minutes left. So let's talk about fake news. Is there such a thing as fake news?
I would say that any time that you have someone who is saying fake news, a politician, that you're generally talking about someone who simply does not like what was said or came off bad in what was said or written. Is there really fake news? Yes, we found that out in the Mueller report, that we have all of these this big operation that's going on where they're planning things on Twitter and on Facebook and creating false persons who are posting these things and making them look like they are legitimate organizations or groups, but they really don't exist. And now that is fake news.
Somebody's manufacturing something to make somebody else do. Yeah, my definition of fake news is when somebody is making up things to distract from the truth. That to me is fake. But other than that, if it's just because I don't like it, and I can't tell you I've liked every bit of coverage. I mean, one of the things I hate about the fact, nobody has a religion writer anymore. And so anytime there's a story that comes out in religion, it's hobcobbed together from what one person did here and one person did here and one person did there. And very rarely do you actually have somebody who's got a comprehensive view of things. So it's all scattered. But I still say that if nobody is forcing us to look at the truth, we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the media can improve. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, yeah.
And that was one of the things you just said. Religion has been an area, but think about the coverage of small towns.
Oh.
And people tend to look at us and think that we all think alike in these small towns. And sometimes they get the impression that we're all rubes out here. And we're not. A lot of intelligent people around here, probably about the same percentage you get in the big cities.
Oh, yeah,
Maybe
I think
more.
the percentages are the same.
Yeah.
I think the percentages are the same. It's just that there are not as many in one spot as there are in another. But yeah, my guest this morning, Randy Turner, who is a local writer, a local editor, former newspaper guy. We're talking this morning about this concept of fake news and what that means in our society. So, Randy, I thank you for your time this morning, and we're going to be right back after this Mercy Minute, so don't go away.
Blessings and greetings of mercy to you. My name is Anna Nichols. I am a Sister of Mercy and currently the leader of Heritage and Spirituality at Mercy International Association. I love the fact that sisters throughout time have gone where they have been called to go, and they have often picked up ministries that they never intended to pick up. 25 years ago, there were 22,000 Sisters of Mercy globally. Today we're down to about 6,200 with Sister Rock and some of the others. But despite the fact there are 6,500 or 6,200 sisters left, there is an amazing number of women and men of mercy who are working alongside us, and that continues to expand, and for me that is incredibly exciting. So as far as National Catholic Sisters Week, I really look at the legacy that they have passed on and the fact that so many women, men, young people are living mercy today. That really is for me what's significant.
Well, again, thank you for joining us this morning for another Sunday morning of faith in our hometown. I'm just grateful that you spend some of your Sunday morning with me. It's always fun to just bat around ideas. And this morning, talking with Randy Turner, who's one of our local editors, writers, newsmen, talking about this concept of what is news supposed to be. And news is supposed to be the truth. And it's supposed to really keep all of us honest, whether we're in the church, whether we're politicians, whether we're the person on the street, or anybody trying to sell something to somebody else. If it's not the truth, that's part of the role of the media to point that out and to shine a light and say, wait a minute, you said this, but now is that the truth? And I think that for them, keeping us all honest, I think is very, very important. I was talking to Randy at the break, and he said, I said, well, what other things have you written? All this stuff's on Amazon, so you can certainly look for Randy Turner on Amazon if you're interested in any of the things he has to say. God bless you. Have a great Sunday, and I hope you join us next week for Faith in Our Hometown.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.